Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collinwood for YouTube. Back here with a reaction review for episode 48 of Dark Shadows, written by Art Wallace, directed by Leila Swift. So let's get going. Watch. So Vicky's gonna speak here. I think I know. Yeah, here we go. This is, I think, to me, episode 48 right here. This is where you could sort of look at it and wonder, okay, how much has time jumped? Because this is also the episode where you see David Hennessy has aged a bit. So it's like, and she's saying she can hardly remember how long she's been here. That she says I've been here at Collinwood. So there's David. He's aged a little bit. I would say this is just a couple days, a couple maybe a week or two, or the next day. I think this is honestly just a couple days later from a story standpoint. The reason I say that is because Bill Malloy, remember, Bill Malloy, technically, he's dead. They haven't found his body yet, but they're going. They don't do that in this episode, by the way, but they don't find his body. So Vicky walks into David's room after knocking, and she has David's drawing. And he was actually looking for his drawing in his room, and he even says, "I was looking all over for it." So she said, "I should have asked." She said, "It's a wonderful drawing." She's telling me he's talented. He's like, "It's not that good." He's like, she's like, "I'd like to show it to Roar today." He's like, "I suppose that would be all right." So she's like, "No one should touch an artist's work but the artist herself." So Vicky's teaching him history. So she brings up how proud he is of it, and now he brings up the fact that he showed the drawing to his father, and he tears up the drawing. Oh my God, the erratic, the David Collins, the master of being erratic, right? There's the intro. From a standpoint of tearing up the picture David drew, is an important plot point. Not really. It's just as more of a reminder of how much David hates his dad. I mean, if you're episode 48 is like, hey, if you haven't heard of the show Dark Shadows, and you haven't heard of David Collins and Roger Collins, and you don't know how David feels about his dad, this is an example of that. That's how episode 48 is starting out here. And it's a smart way to start out because it's fine to remind Dark Shadows fans of what's going on. That's one thing because DS fans like to have a reminder, right? But it's also important to let new people who are maybe coming to the show for the first time, even in today's world, if you've never heard of Dark Shadows and you're just coming to watch this episode for the first time, let's just say you pick this episode at random. Okay, you hear the name Roger Collins, you know Vicky mentions about that's David's dad, so you know that's David's dad, right? Well, here's this you know picture that David drew of Collinwood. Well, now you have to get across how David might feel about his dad if you didn't watch the prior episode. Um, David, and as soon as Vicky mentions she showed it, or sorry, she showed it to David's dad, what's David do? He tears up the drawing. So it's very, very interesting. It's just a smart thing to do, really. It's a great job by writer Art Wallace and director Leila Swift. And there you get a close up of David from the side, from his right side, and then they pull it back, and you get both Victoria and David in the picture. Then another close up of David when he's talking. Again, this is a Leila Swift special, so you'll get that a lot. Sometimes you'll get pan back, close up. But what sometimes you'll get too with Leila, when she's building, when she doesn't want you to know who's coming, sometimes you'll see shots of somebody's feet. And then too with David, I don't care what he thinks about anything. Again, it's just a reminder of the tense relationship between David and his dad. Also, something you'll see with Leila Swift in her direction is she'll shoot people opening the window and she'll shoot people shutting a window. You also get an outside shot of that where you're on the outside of the CV terrace or the set itself, if you get what I'm saying, and you'll see Victoria or Elizabeth or somebody shutting a window, and then you get the inside of the room they're in, whether it's Vicky's, whether it's the drawing room. It's something Leela does in her directing of Dark Shadows that you'll see. So again, David's reminding us that Elizabeth told him to be nice to Vicky. Now, you notice Vicky said we had a disagreement about the American Revolution, and that's not really what happened. And a present for David. A present for David. It's from Burke. It's a crystal ball. This is where David gets the crystal ball. So we get a crystal ball. Fortune tellers use. So it's from. They find out that's from Burke Devlin. The crystal ball is from Burke. He says he wants to thank Burke. Elizabeth's like, no. I think the Telltale episode where you find out how long it's really been from a not just a story context, but like an overall context is when they show Bill Malloy's body to when they the coroner episode where they're talking about Bill Malloy, how long Bill Malloy's been in the water or potentially been in the water. So also, yeah, given a crystal ball by man. um, Burke does well. It's not that Burke doesn't does. It's not that Burke hates the Collins family. Burke doesn't like Roger. He knows Roger's lying. I mean, that's what it is. So, and that's the thing too. Like, you have a character who wants the truth to come out about Roger. The fact that the writers stretch this all those episodes that they do, because you don't find this out till after episode 200. You don't find out what really, from a story context, what really happened till after episode 200. But it's not hard to guess. It's not hard, from everything you've been told thus far, it's not hard to guess what's happened. That, and I say this, not just because I watched Dark Shadows a bunch of times, but when I first watched it, you're sort of getting from David Ford's Sam Evans that his wife was sick. That Sam Evans' wife was sick. I want to stress that. And that, now, again, they never say what she was sick from or what she died from, but she died from whatever ailed her. She died from whatever was, what she was ill from. So, and I think even by this episode, you can tell Sam Evans, you know, well, before this episode, in my opinion, you can tell that that Sam was key to sending Burke to prison. I think really after Burke coming back, you can tell that when Roger goes to bang on the door, but also your first sort of interactions with Sam, you can sort of tell that something he's responsible ultimately for sending Burke to prison. Starts knocking at the door. We know it isn't Burke. He's just on the phone. It's Joe Haskell. He's asking for Elizabeth. That's a crystal ball. He said, "Have you ever seen him?" So Joe says, "What you need in this house?" You notice Joe doesn't answer if he's ever seen one before. You notice that? It's kind of odd when you think about it from a character standpoint. Joe never answers that question. And it's not like it's a harmful question. It makes you think that Joe has seen one before and just doesn't want to own it for whatever reason. It builds a little mystery behind Joe a bit. Not a lot, just a little. And I'm not saying that's a setup for, like, the Jennings twins or anything. I just think it's the writers adding a little foreplay for your pleasure, really. Keeping the character mysterious. But it's smart, though, too. You have Elizabeth who comes down the step, across the top staircase, down the steps. And, and now Joe's running Mr. Malloy's errands. This is what's crazy. This gives you implications that this is just the next day. That this is just the next day after the meeting that happened between Burke, Sam, and Roger in Bill Malloy's office. Because when Joe's Joe's not just stopping by here for pleasure. He's not just stopping by here to see Carolyn. He brings these important papers that are for the Collins Cannery to Elizabeth. And what's interesting about that is Bill Malloy didn't bring them, right? So I talked about how in a previous episode, Bill Malloy, though he died in episode 46, most likely, 47 acknowledges his death. In a weird way. It's sort of acknowledging it without acknowledging it. In episode 48, no, Bill Malloy hasn't been at the office all day. He also hasn't. He isn't at home, and you hear that Now you hear the second mention of a Mrs. Johnson. We heard the name Mrs. Johnson in the previous episode. We're hearing it again. It's to let you know a new character is coming too. When the character is getting a lot of mention, it usually means we're going to get a reveal. Usually. Not always. Remember Ned Coulter? We don't get a reveal of what he looks like. You missed Johnson. That's his housekeeper. Okay, yep, this is the next day. This is the next day. How about that? So this is the next day. Even though David looks older, this is the next day, so I was wrong. Though Victoria's narration says she can't remember how long she's been. Okay. So Mr. Malloy has not come home at all since he left his house last night sometime. So Liz says she did try to reach Bill Malloy after 11, but Miss Malloy seemed upset. And Joe asked, "You don't suppose something really did happen to him?" Again, Leela Swift shoots this. You see Elizabeth's face, like concern, and then you see Joe Haskell standing behind her. Now you're getting a back shot of Joe, but you see Elizabeth on the phone. Then here's a little bit of a close up. It's not a close up, it's a bit of a close up. They pan the camera forward, and they're probably going to pan the camera back here, too. Again, I've talked about this with the directors putting their own stamp on episodes. That's what they're doing. I would bet my bottom dollar that's what they've been doing. I think that's something that needs to really be acknowledged too. That the directors are putting their own stamps on these episodes. So Vicky says that Bill Malloy was in here before 10. So Mr. Collins saw Mr. Malloy last night before 10. And now Elizabeth says, but, Mr. Collins. Now she says she'll look at the contracts later. She'll sign them. And now you get Vicky and Elizabeth in the drawing room. And now Elizabeth's questioned Vicky about Mr. Boyd coming here last night. And Vicky's like, yes. Okay. And Vicky says no. And that's the truth. Vicky doesn't know what Bill Malloy came there for last night. They both seemed upset. That Bill Malloy seemed upset with Roger. And Vicky asked, has something happened between the two of them? So you get Vicky saying that when Bill Malloy came in, he seemed upset that Vicky better go get Mr. Collins or he would. Vicky also asked Elizabeth, did something happen between the two of them? Again, not just a character who says, I don't understand, Vicky was a very important character in Dark Shadows history. It's something I think people are just trying to throw dirt on, and it's wrong. Here, sort of, Vicky's sort of learning that Elizabeth asked her, why didn't you mention anything? She goes, I didn't think it was any of my business. So Vicky is trying to mind her own business because she's been warned about that too. So Elizabeth, Vicky tells Elizabeth that Mr. Malloy was extending an invitation to Roger to a meeting, and she said, "To what? To what meeting?" She said, "I don't know." She asked if Mr. Vicky asked if Mr. Malloy has ever gone before, and she said, "No, this is the first time, and this is the last time too." Oh my God, there's the old grandfather clock. So it's basically almost lunchtime. It's 11:30. That's when this episode starts at 11:30. Your time. Your time is up. So Joe asked David to find out where Bill Malloy's at. And he said, "What happened to him?" And Joe said he disappeared. No one knows where he's at. And Joe says that he thinks the crystal ball is a fake. He said, "Why can't it find Bill Malloy?" So the crystal ball told David, hey, David that he won't marry Joe. He won't. She won't marry Burke either. She won't marry Joe, but she won't marry. That crystal ball's wrong. That's David being cruel. Vicky said, "I'm sure nothing's happening." You're wrong, girl. Joe tells Vicky to give David SWAT for her. And now Joe is leaving with the documents that Elizabeth signed. Yeah, everything so far has been shot at Collinwood, the stage of Collinwood, the sound stage of Collinwood. We've seen David's room. The we've seen the drawing room. We've seen the foyer. And sometimes you'll get that with episodes too. And now she's talking to Roger. She's like, "I'd like to speak to you at once." He's like, "I don't care what you're doing at the moment." Liz is gonna lay the smack down. And now she's calling him on his lie. She's letting him know. She's like, "I have no intention of discussing my phone. What you hear now, Liz. Remember when I said Liz is the boss? Liz is the boss." And now you get shots of David's room again. And he's staring at the crystal ball. David says he wants to see what's going to happen. Vicky says he won't learn a thing. And now Vicky says, "I want you to do these math problems." David's doing math problems. And David says everyone's worried about Mr. Malloy. When did he disappear? Last night, Vicky says. He did disappear last night. Vicky says she thinks Bill Malloy had some sort of emergency. No, no. David says they can ask me what they tell him. He said he looked her. He's dead. David says Bill Malloy's dead. He was killed by some. the crystal ball says that David's dad killed Bill Malloy. And that's the end of the episode. So, why is the crystal ball half right, half wrong? Again, they're trying to. Dark Shadows by this time had already revealed its first ghost. So, introducing a crystal ball element is sort of more into supernatural lore. We're going to get the biggest. We're not going to get the biggest ghost sighting until later, which is Josette. But we've already, the crystal ball is a smart idea. And it's something you don't have to be right about all the time. Okay, what's the crystal ball right about, for example? Bill Malloy is dead, yes. Spoiler alert, Roger isn't the killer. That's David being David right there. I mean, look how this episode began. And look how David tore up the drawing as soon as he realized his father saw it and had his hands on it. That's how much hatred, not just David has for his father, but David has in him. And even David told Victoria, I have not forgiven you for you telling on me, for getting me in trouble, which really David got himself in trouble, by messing with the bleeder valve of his dad's car. And then when Joe, calls the crystal ball, he doesn't believe the crystal ball. That's when David says, "Oh, you won't marry Carolyn," which is true. That's right. But neither will Burke. So the crystal ball is right and wrong if you're looking into the storyline context of it. Now, I will say, with this episode, going back and rewatching it again, I like episode 48 a lot for a lot of reasons. Though is it filler? A bit, but I will say they do a lot of things here for this episode that, okay, we don't have Chris and Tom Jennings, right, yet. David asked a question to Joe. He says, have you ever seen one of these before? Joe doesn't answer. And I find that sometimes it's not a yes or a no that gives the character weight. It's not answering at all. And I do feel Joe has seen one of those before and knows what it's used for. It lets me know Joe may not like supernatural things, even by this episode. So, though Joe himself has teased about ghosts, the crystal ball may have been maybe a sort of weird reality for him that he saw it before. Maybe it's something that he sees it in this episode. Maybe it's something he has saw and experienced in his family. We don't know. That's never answered. But that little non-answer could sort of lead you down a really interesting road when you're getting into the character of Joe Haskell. I'm not saying that's the case, but it's really interesting how. And I don't think the writers just forgot to write a response in. I think the writers intentionally didn't write a response in for Joe or Joel Carruthers, who played Joe Haskell, because they want the audience guessing. Well, does he know what it is, or is he just not answering because he knows what it is and he's either used one before and he's seen one used before? And that little sort of fun segue of that is really a great job by Art Wallace, the writer of this episode. It's really, really smart to do because it leaves you asking a ton of questions like I'm doing now. Now, again, we're only episode 48, but still. And again, I talked about, I wasn't sure if they were like time jumping here. No, even though, to be very clear, even though David Hennessy does look a little older, this episode is taking place the next day after Bill Malloy went missing, where he missed the meeting previous night. This episode takes place the next day. So there's no official time jump here within Dark Shadows. So what's with Alexander Eisel's opening narration? It's just done for suspense. It's done for, here's somebody who's she's getting almost too cozy with her surroundings in a way. That she feels like she's been here so long, she's almost lost track. And that's something you could have happen. It's what I've talked about where you're having a conversation, you don't realize how much time has passed. Well, she's been somewhere for long enough, she's not sure how much time has passed while she's been here. I'm not talking hours, I'm just talking days, weeks in general, but it's only been days. It's probably been, I would say this makes a week. Like this makes a week and maybe a day um, by this episode. So it's going by day. And just again, I've talked about this too, just because you get a new episode, doesn't mean you're getting a new day. Example, episode 49 is going to take place in the same day that this episode is. Um, though, again, with this episode, you do notice this episode more starts more toward lunch. It starts like more toward 11:30. So they're starting this episode more midday. And again, it's a tack the writers are going to use to sort of get through days because they might not have. I think most episodes are 3 to 4. Most days in Collinsport or Collinwood, from a fictional sense, are 3 to 4 episodes long, sometimes 5. But it also depends what time fictionally they're starting the episode. Again, this episode is starting midday, so you wouldn't think it has a lot of episodes to it. But we'll see. We'll see if I'm right about that. I could be wrong. I don't think I am. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed this review. Have a good day.